Okay, let's just dive right into this explainer. We're going to unravel the absolutely fascinating and honestly pretty surprising history behind a day that literally millions of us celebrate, but very few of us actually understand. We're looking at the evolution and the deep cultural identity of Cinco de Mayo. And right off the bat, I got to tell you, this isn't just a story about a single battle or, a massive party. It's this incredibly complex narrative that weaves together immigration, political solidarity, civil rights, and, believe it or not, modern marketing.
Think about how you celebrated last year. Maybe you head up a parade, grabbed some amazing food and music, or maybe you just noticed those giant displays at your local grocery store. But stop and ask yourself, what exactly are we even commemorating here? If you ask the average person on the street, they're almost certainly going to tell you, oh, it's Mexican Independence Day. But it's not. That's actually September 16th. So what is this day really about? And more importantly, who is it actually for?
Well, here is the ultimate surprise of this entire story. Contrary to what pretty much everyone assumes, Cinco de Mayo became this widely celebrated thing in the United States long before it became a major cultural event in most of Mexico. Yeah, that's right. The holiday, at least as this massive cultural phenomenon we know today, was actually born directly out of the Mexican-American experience.
Part 1. Born in the USA. The 1860s origins.
So, the initial spark for all of this was the Battle of Puebla. Back in 1862, a vastly outnumbered Mexican army faced off against the incredibly powerful French Empire. And against all odds, totally against the odds, the Mexican forces secured this stunning military victory. When news of this massive underdog triumph traveled up north, it absolutely electrified Mexican communities living in California and the American Southwest. The reaction was basically immediate. Just 1 year after the battle, in 1863, the very first known celebrations popped up right in California. Now, these weren't parties in the modern sense at all. They featured passionate speeches, parades, and deep expressions of solidarity with Mexico. But, as the decades passed into the late 1800s and early 1900s, that immediate political relevance kind of faded away, and these celebrations gradually declined into much smaller, more localized events. The absolutely crucial takeaway here is that these early U.S. celebrations were highly political. Think about it. At the exact same time Mexico was fighting the French, the United States was literally tearing itself apart in the Civil War. And Mexican Americans largely supported the Union cause. They saw this incredibly clear shared struggle, right? Mexican liberals were fighting off a monarchy and European imperialism, which perfectly aligned with the democratic ideals of the Union. Plus, the U.S. government was deeply worried that a French victory right next door in Mexico could seriously threaten U.S. interests. So back then, celebrating Cinco de Mayo was actually a bold political statement of democracy and anti-imperialism.
Part 2. The Chicano Movement, the 1960s and 1970s revival.
Okay, let's fast forward to the 1960s and 70s. This right here is the major turning point. During the Chicano movement, Mexican-American activists were looking back into history for a powerful symbol of identity and heritage, and they essentially revived Cinco de Mayo. Why this specific day? Well, because the Battle of Puebla was the ultimate metaphor for an underdog resisting oppression and domination. These activists completely reframed the day. They turned it into this incredibly powerful celebration of Mexican identity, empowerment, and cultural pride, specifically right here in the United States.
Part 3. Commercial Takeover, the 1980s to the present.
Now, the holiday's meaning shifted pretty rapidly after that revival. We started with those deep historical and political origins in the 1860s, then we moved to that cultural pride revival a century later, and finally we arrive at step 3, the highly commercialized party that we all recognize today. In the 1980s, corporate beer companies, specifically giants like Anheuser-Busch and Miller, saw a massive opportunity to market directly to Latino consumers. So they launched these heavy advertising campaigns, aggressively pushing all this fiesta imagery. And because of that, the holiday's DNA was just permanently altered. It became heavily associated with drinking and partying, kind of seamlessly blending some authentic traditions with, let's be honest, highly simplified cultural stereotypes. It literally followed the exact same path of commercialization as St. Patrick's Day and Halloween.
Part 4. U.S. versus Mexico, a tale of two nations.
So let's look at the reality today. In the United States, it's a nationwide event, right? It's festive, it's social, and it is heavily tied to pop culture and that commercialized party scene we just talked about. But down in Mexico, it's primarily a localized event. It's centered mainly in the state of Puebla, where the actual battle occurred. And it is absolutely not a nationwide party holiday. It's actually very formal and patriotic. We're talking military reenactments, official ceremonies, and school events focused heavily on history. It's a day of remembrance, not a day of partying.
The contrast here is just incredible. The exact same historical event means two completely different things depending on which side of the border you're standing on. In the US, it's this nationwide, highly commercialized festival that's broadly focused on identity. But in Mexico, it remains a localized, formal, and really educational day of historical remembrance.
Part 5. Cultural memory. Why exactly is there such a difference?
Really, it all comes down to different historical needs. Mexico as a nation already has plenty of defining historical events, like its actual Independence Day on September 16th, or the Day of the Dead. Within Mexico, Cinco de Mayo is honestly just one small moment in a very long national history. But for Mexican Americans living in diaspora, living outside their ancestral homeland, the needs were entirely different. They needed unique symbols to preserve their heritage, to build a sense of community, and to publicly express their identity within the United States. And Cinco de Mayo just perfectly filled that role.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a thought about how immigrant communities actually reshape historical events over time. Because the journey from a bloody 1862 battlefield to a 1960 civil rights symbol, and finally to a modern corporate fiesta, it's super complex. So ask yourself, does turning a profound moment of historical resilience into a highly commercialized party actually help cultural visibility by making it mainstream? Or does that commercialization just erase the very history and the very struggles we're supposed to be remembering? Definitely something to keep in mind the next time May 5th rolls around. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer.